We're live. This is the first live episode of the Don't Panic podcast, featuring the Honorable EddieLigerSmith. Thanks for coming out and joining us. I've got my lovely co-host below me, Jed, aka Yeetwood Mac today. Man, I usually have a silly name every time we record our podcast on Zencastr, and this one is blown all of mine out of the water, and I'm a little mad I didn't come up with it first.
I expected you to have a silly name because mine is always just my name, and then yours is something ridiculous. So I figured I would go with it, and then here I am.
My brand name is already silly enough. I don't think I need to. Comrade Jewel.
That's true.
Comrade Jewel.
It was actually CEO of Jewel for a while, and my favorite thing was to go into lives and they'd be like, "Holy shit, are you actually the CEO of Jewel?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm trying to get Jewel pods for cats out there. Do you want to be one of our sponsored content creators?"
So you were the CEO of Jewel, and then you became a communist, and now you're Comrade Jewel?
Exactly.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
It's a whole character arc. Eventually, once I read enough, I'll be Stalinist Jewel, and I'll be everyone's enemy. It'll be great.
Yeah.
But so we brought on Eddie for a number of reasons. One, he's super educated in like world politics and history. He's done some work for the great Bernie Sanders, who, if you've listened to my podcast, you've also heard me talk some shit about. But that's just because I have a lot of strong feelings, and but I also do have some questions because in my trolling online and trying to learn things the way that I do, I've seen a number of left criticisms of Bernie, and I'd love to get your more educated thoughts on them, because me taking it in and saying it is also more just like kind of repeating an idea that I don't fully understand. I'd love to get your context there. But yes, so boom, we've got Eddie, the wrestling fucking communist.
Yeah.
Suplexing the state.
Yep.
Putting capitalism in an armbar.
That's funny.
What? So how did you start working for Bernie? What did you do? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so that was in my senior year of school and wrestling. And we started volunteering for Bernie. So at Loris, the school I went to, we had something called the Labor Club, which is basically just, socialist club. We ran these things called socialist night schools, where we would give educational stuff on Fred Hampton. We did a lot of different stuff, on American socialist history, on the history of the civil rights movement, and the fact that most of the civil rights leaders were actually socialist. So that was a great way for me to educate people, but then also educate myself, because, you learn a lot from preparing, hour-long presentations to give people about socialism. And a lot of my TikTok videos, I just, kind of take excerpts from whatever I wrote for that and read it on TikTok. And then, so as we were doing that, meeting Carlos, who runs my website with me, and all these other people, we saw Bernie was running for president, and Iowa's a huge swing state, and Dubuque, the town I lived in particular, was a big place. It was a hot spot. People were traveling from Wisconsin, from all over the country to Dubuque. So we're like, all right, we got to get in on this. This is a huge opportunity. So we started meeting with the Bernie staffers, started organizing and volunteering, and then they said, we can pay you guys if we bring you on as interns. So we're like, heck yeah. And then we ended up just working as interns for 2 months until Pete Buttigieg and the Democrats stole the election, including trying to steal Iowa. So yeah.
Wow. And so how did they actually steal Iowa?
So in Iowa, Iowa's almost every time a candidate wins Iowa, they go on to win the whole primary, because it's the first state, so you have momentum. So Bernie won the popular vote, and I believe he won the most national delegates, but there's this one tally called state delegates that actually doesn't mean anything. It doesn't signify anything. It's an antiquated like thing to even tally. And Pete won that, the state delegate. So of course the media has blown it up as Pete won. I've actually been shocked going and looking at the media since then. At the debacle with Iowa, they all are still claiming Pete won. And me being there, I was like, but we won in votes and national delegates. So that was one thing. But two, the vote counting app was designed by a company called Shadow. And this is a little conspiratorial. There's no proof here, but they did, Pete and the Democratic Party had ties to Shadow. And then the DNC came in, and this has all just been revealed recently. So the way we saw it was all our internal polling said we were going to win. So on caucus day, we all work, a 15-hour day, working all day to get people out. And then we go and we sit down and start drinking to like celebrate. We know we're going to win, and we're waiting for the votes to come in. And all of a sudden it's 2 a.m. in the morning and they still haven't announced who won. And they're saying there's all these issues with how they counted it. So what we're finding out now is the DNC went into Shadow and they said, hey, you need to make sure that the way you're tallying the votes matches up with how we're tallying the votes. And we need to put them all, before we announce results, we need to compare them and put them in a computer. And the DNC software was not compatible with Shadow software, and it screwed the whole thing up. So we didn't get the full Iowa results for maybe a month or two afterwards. So that was the thing in Iowa. And that, everybody, I got like my whole wrestling team to come out and vote for Bernie. And it was just a great way, honestly, like it was sad, but I could point at them and I was like, do you guys see why our system is so bad now? Because they were like dumbfounded. They're like, we did all this work for Bernie, and like, what, the caucus is stupid. What, we were like dragging a lady in a wheelchair up the stairs to try and get her in to vote, and they were like trying to close the doors on her. Then you have this app called Shadow in the DNC who like screws with all the votes. My friends who are pretty apolitical were like, this is nonsense. This is democracy. Like they were, so it was interesting on that level too. But yeah.
Damn, that's gotta be a very radicalizing experience. I mean, even like hearing that, it's just, I while at least in Philly has been super smooth, you know what I mean? It's kind of insane to see people still have such strong faith in the system after something like that happens. It feels like, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? I just feel like more radicalized, and I knew the basics of that story, and I understood the sort of like the name Shadow sounds shady. You know what I mean? It sounds like too super villainy, like that. Like there's a bad Saturday morning cartoon about this very topic with Shadow as like the evil entity. It's and yet I'm dumbfounded that it's real.
Right. And what I would bring up is Venezuela just had their elections, which, by the way, in 2012, U.S. President Jimmy Carter called the most heavily monitored elections anywhere in the world, which had thousands of international observers, but the UN and the EU didn't go. I covered that pretty heavily. But we're using Venezuela's elections, which the U.S. is claiming are fraudulent without even going to investigate, as reasoning to like militarily overthrow their government. It's like, imagine if Venezuela said, hey, look what happened in the Iowa caucus. We're going to come overthrow Trump. Like, no, of course not. But the U.S. can get away with that shit, and it's
constantly. Exactly. It's very, very strange.
And that's what happens when you spend decades establishing yourself as a militaristic imperial power. So
and economic.
Everyone has to. Yeah, that too. Everyone has to listen to you. I mean, we have bases and rockets everywhere, and it's not like we're very in your face saying, "Well, we're going to blow you up if." But there's a lot of sort of subtext there that the U.S. is sort of very calculatedly crafted.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, one of our favorite things is like, hey, you've got resources. Looks like you need some regime change.
I
Looks
mean,
like-
everyone makes
Did I tell
the
you
oil
some-
joke.
Right.
Everyone makes
It's an open secret.
makes the oil joke. Oh. I think this thing lags, but so I was gonna say is everyone makes the oil joke, but I mean, there's a reason why we all make the joke. There's a lot of truth to it.
Yeah, I mean it's the open secret of U.S. politics. I mean, and just sort of, I don't know, any sort of. I'm starting to see that when you put like United in front of things, it's a very small group of people that are united to subjugate another group of people who are united, but in their own sort of way.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Like-
united by force.
Oh yeah. Oh, I was going to say united by class struggle, but
But I meant when the U.S. was pulling people in to be, it's like the idea of we're all united under the same military dominance.
yeah. But
I'm not united with United Airlines either. I hate them.
Dude, didn't United Airlines like drag a dude by his feet? Is that them?
I think that was
like
it was
one
like
of the terrible ones.
It's like a doctor or something. They like dragged him out.
Actually,
I'll look this up while you guys talk.
Fair enough. I have a question because so Russiagate, right? The what are your thoughts? What are the implications? And what is the situation? Like, Russia is our big bad in so many ways. Like I have felt like a supervillain, or my parents and my grandparents have reminded me that I'm the supervillain in every Bond movie. Just I'm half Russian, and I want to know, like, what is there? Obviously, like, Putin is a terrible leader with a lot of really shady stuff that he has done. But what sort of led to that that we don't really know? What kind of context is there between, like, the sort of Cold War dick measuring competition to Russia being America light?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in Russia, but the way I understand it, so 75% of Russians wish they could go back to the USSR, and Yeltsin has like a 17% approval rating, who is the man who Gorbachev has like a 17% approval rating amongst Russians, and he was the person who transferred it from USSR into the collapse and made them a capitalist country, which was the worst economic period in Russian history since they were a feudal agrarian society living under a monarchy. There was unemployment of like 20%. Foreign capital was flooding into the country. People saw all the stuff they had. All the benefits that workers had under the socialist state were now being abolished. Their homes were housing and whatnot was being sold off to private capital, so their rent was jacked up, and people were like, "What is this?" They thought capitalism. They had been sold the idea that capitalism is just when you have sneakers and all these consumer goods, and it's just great. So now people want to go back, and like we said, of course, the Soviet Union wasn't perfect, but what happened afterwards, people liked a lot less. So now there's all this. As Thomas Riggins was mentioning in our lecture earlier, I guess that Jewel was on. Stalin and World War II have kind of become this like patriotic thing for the Russians, where a lot of them are like, we want to go back to this, right? We want to create a worker state. So Putin has gone ahead and like nationalized a lot of the natural gas and a lot of the major economic sectors in Russia, kind of going back to a Soviet policy, sort of a hybrid. And they've been trading a lot with with China and Venezuela, who obviously the United States doesn't like. And then they're allied with Assad in Syria, who the U.S. has been trying to overthrow since, I think, either 2011 or 2014 was when that started. I get it mixed with Libya sometimes. So, and then, you have Trump come to power, and Trump doesn't really have an ideology, right? He's just kind of doing whatever. He's friends with Putin. He's friends with Kim Jong-un. But as far as Trump's economic policy, it's not actually that friendly to Russia. There have been more, not just economic policy, but military policy. We've increased the amount of troops on Russia's borders, and that we have around the sea, or around the naval presence we have around Russia. And we also heavily sanctioned their natural gas firms who have chosen to trade with Venezuela and China. So if Russia says, hey, we're going to trade some oil with Venezuela, the U.S. says, oh, we're going to sanction that specific Russian firm and make it so they can't trade. That's not something Putin wants, and that's not something Russia wants, which blows a hole in the Democrats' Russiagate scandal, which is this idea that Russia totally controlled our elections. It wasn't because Hillary Clinton was a bad candidate and Trump was sort of a proto-fascist who came to power at the right time and said the right things to get American workers. Nope, it was Russia. Hillary would have won, but Russia hacked our elections. The only evidence they have of that is that there were troll farms in Russia who were posting memes to Facebook and stuff, which, maybe it's not good. And maybe they have some sort of ties to the Kremlin, and that's not good. But that's the U.S. accusing another country of meddling in our democracy, which, of course, how hypocritical. We're the empire who overthrows every other country's democracy. So in reality, what's going on with Russia is really, really minor with what happened in the elections. And the Democrats have used it as a way to, we have no blame for losing this election. Trump wasn't our fault. And then anybody who comes out against the war in Syria, anybody who supports Venezuela, anybody who supports China, what the Democrats are now doing is you're an asset of Russia. You're an asset of Putin. You're an asset of the Kremlin. And I mean, I've been called an asset of Putin. They're like, how much is Putin paying you? People in my comments. I'm like, bro, I have like $4 in my bank account.
Right.
I wish Putin would pay me. So Russia.
Dude, I was so hoping for those like sweet Soros bucks when I got into like political shit. I was like, right. George is out here cutting checks. Let's go. At least according to the Republicans. Like, if I just base my opinion off the what Trump said, I voted for Joe Biden because Trump said he's a communist, and that's what I'm about. So. This is a terrible ad campaign. But sorry, I got distracted. What were you?
I think I was pretty much done. Just like Russia, I was just gonna finish with Russiagate is sort of like Trump's and the Republicans' election fraud, right? They're like, no, there's no way we could have lost the election. It was this other thing that has very little to no evidence. It's the same thing with the Republicans. Nope, there's no way we could have lost. Democrats are all dumb and stupid, and we're all smart and correct. But then when Democrats do it, nobody calls them on it, or the communists and the real leftists and socialists don't seem to call them on it as much, because we see liberals as less shitty than the racist, other side. But
I see a lot of. Actually, that's something that I wanted to touch on, because I think that there's some like muddying of the water of like leftists and liberals, at least on online discourse, that were like, I would follow somebody because, maybe they have leftists in their bio, or they said something that was economically like kind of left. And I'm like, okay, they're not asking very high with their content. They're trying to bring in somebody who's a little bit closer to the center. And, who am I to argue with an effective tactic, right? If I see that they've got a lot of followers, and I'm like, all right, let me at least see, right? And, there's a couple of aesthetics of like leftism going on, like, fuck the police, whatever. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Right.
But then when you get into responding to criticism of people who are further left than them, like defending Joe Biden just point blank and not listening to any like opinions or even, being like, hey, Biden won, let's just kick it back. Or Kamala Harris is now our vice president. This is a grand thing. And it's like, but like a black woman being vice president is historic, but at the same time, this particular black woman also has done things that have hurt black people, and that doesn't shield her from the criticism of the policy and action in her position of power that she took. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you're good.
Kamala's like that meme, where you got the Republicans. It's a a plane flying over Iraq and dropping bombs. And then when you have the Democrats, it's a plane with the BLM sticker and a pride flag dropping bombs. Kamala's the same way. It's like, do you think a person who's in jail right now on a trumped up charge or on a drug charge is going to be like, whoa, thank goodness there's a black woman in the White House? Like, no, they want to get out of jail. And Kamala's helped put a lot of people in jail. And I see what you're saying with because, us as creators, you kind of make friends with the other political creators and you make fun of the liberals. And I think you and I saw an example of it the other day with that one guy, My Dude, I think is his username. And he makes pretty good anti-racist content. And he made a video saying that our other friend, or my friend Ian, is not a leftist because what is it? How's it pronounced?
It's Owen.
Owen? Okay, I thought it was Ian. Owen. Okay. Owen. So Owen made a video mocking Elon Musk for his child dying, which, not something that I would personally do, but it's not something I really get offended by or take issue with. And this guy is like, no, that makes you the same as the right. And I'm like, no. What makes you being on the left is if you're pro economic change, changing our economic system to help the masses rather than the owning class, and it's being anti-imperialist. It's being against the wars of expansion generally, and then anti-racism, feminism, all that stuff is really important too. But you can't change those things until you change the economic base and until you're anti-imperialist, until you get our country to stop murdering brown people and black people all around the world. So if you're not those two things, you're not a leftist. And he's saying you're not a leftist if you say mean things about Elon Musk. That makes you the same as the right. It's like, no, for me, what makes you the same as the right is supporting capitalism, because you're not going to change any of the things we care about unless you fix capitalism. So, I mean, and I try and be nice. I made a nice comment on that video, but I was like, this is wrong, basically, in my opinion. Being a leftist means anti-capitalism or pro-working class and anti-war for me.
Yeah.
So I watch My Dude stuff, and I like most of it, and I like most of the takes. He's well spoken, and he's good at sort of getting his thoughts out there in a condensed what's the best word manner that's like easy to intake. But I definitely see him as the kind of person that would fall into the almost sort of the catch-22 of believing that people on the left need to be better than like socially, morally, in face-to-face interactions. We have to be the the higher up example. We don't punch down, and the problem with that is it turns almost into sort of a holier than thou kind of way at looking at political discourse, where we won't stoop to their level. But the problem is, the reason why people look at the right as winners in debates is because they do stoop to those levels, and that's why discourse is a really tough thing. Sorry, you're gonna say something.
I was going to say, I agree with you. And I think it's the opposite, where I wish more people on the left would be fighters, take some of those tactics from the right. Like, we're like facing these evil, monstrous humans like John Bolton and Mitch McConnell, who will do anything to win. They'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal, they'll share they'll make propaganda, they'll lie, they'll straw man you. And then on the left, of course, we want to be honest because we're actually trying to improve people's lives, not just enrich ourselves. But it's like, you have to fight back. You have to realize at some level you're in a fight against, the bourgeoisie, the rich and the people who are profiting off war. And it's like, if you are like, well, let's not use any mean words towards them. It's like, no, fuck them. Like, I don't give a shit about Mitch McConnell. Sorry. Or Elon Musk.
Musk, like that fuck Elon Musk. I couple of good points were brought up, and I want to just reiterate mine. One, someone was giving Elon Musk shit about the loss of his kid because he was being shitty. He made posted a really shitty meme about trans people, and it's basically when you put he, him, or pronouns in your bio, and it was like not a Confederate, but a British soldier via Revolutionary War times, rubbing blood on his face, and it's like the oppressor on his hat, and I'm like,
Tory.
I guess, I don't know, just red coat, but red coat with like rubbing blood with the satisfied like meme face, like the ooh, right. And it's very, very clear. There's clear intention with the imagery, and you know that sort of shit is very harmful in itself, right? Because people being shitty towards trans people and like shitty attitudes, you know, just generally contribute to their, you know, mental health issues, and that sucks. And like that's not fucking cool. And two, Elon Musk fucking has children in mines mining for lithium. I don't give a fuck about his kid because he doesn't give a fuck about poor kids that are making him millions. Suck a dick. Like Elon Musk can you know, Elon Musk, fuck him, you know.
Yeah, I think this is one of the sort of ultimate failings of the left, and it sort of breeds almost into the problem with like liberalism too. Is you know, what's the best way to say this? We sort of consider ourselves to be the sort of morally upstanding, empathetic side of the political spectrum. But then that leads into the feelings of believing that, you know, there has to be niceties and respectful discourse. And you fall into this problem of trying to invoke empathy into people that don't have it. And so then we've spoken about this before, Jewel, but, you know, the problem is we talk a lot about these sort of talking heads on the right that are viewed as these sort of intellectual juggernauts like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, Steven Crowder, small face, what's his name? Oh my God, Charlie Kirk, right? And these are dudes, you know, they're so heavily like put on these intellectual pedestals and fanned over by faux intellectual right wingers because when it comes to political discourse, the whole point is that they're not right, but they win, and they win by being like underhanded. They win by being malicious and vindictive, and you know they like Ben Shapiro, and you know we can find the video on Twitter if we have to, but he's admitted to cherry picking stats to make bad faith arguments. You know, and that's the whole point. And so he creates sort of intellectual loopholes to the point where someone who does not do those things will get wrapped into a circle and can't fight back, and then he is now won. And it doesn't mean that he's actually correct in what they were debating about, but the debate is now over.
Yeah, they put on a good show. They create the air and the aesthetic of like, well, I just said a bunch of things really, really quickly, and I'm gonna put you in a little box. Don't defend slavery. You know, like. Here's a red herring, a non sequitur. Oh, you took my red herring. Ha! Now you're stupid.
And Ben Shapiro is smart enough to know that he doesn't have to put that kind of work into his intellectual debates. He's already got a huge fan base that loves him rabidly, and he's created a brand around himself as this person on the right. He doesn't need to change that. He doesn't need to put in more effort. You know, I mean, we on the left can clown him all we want about his wife's dry pussy, but it doesn't matter. You know, like the right still salivates over his, you know, destroying liberals on college campuses. And, you know, he's again, that's also calculated. He picks his opponents very specifically to win. But and the right sees that and they're like, oh man, it's a winning streak. You know, it's like when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, man. We didn't play anybody that was really particularly good. You know, like and I'm a huge Eagles fan, you know, and that Super Bowl will mean everything to me until the day I die. But it's true. We didn't really face anyone that was that great on the way there, you know? So it's like, I mean, a winning streak, like, okay, if you're an MMA fighter, right? Or, you know, and you have a winning streak of like 30-0, it's a whole lot impressive it's a whole lot unimpressive if that 30-0 was against fucking fifth graders. You know what I mean? And that's sort of the same idea behind Ben Shapiro is that like.
Are you telling me that my fifth grade fights don't count towards my MMA career? Eddie, you're in combat sports. I've beaten up a lot of fifth graders.
It all counts. It's all for. If you felt pride when you won, it counts.
Oh God. But yeah, no, I mean that's basically the thing right there is, Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder, they win against wholly unprepared. I mean, and the arguments and what they talk about too is all set up. I mean, fucking Steven Crowder sits there with a table and a coffee mug and a sign that says "Prove me wrong" or whatever, right? But the whole context of what they're talking about is something that he's prepared. So some kid who's like, that's not right. I mean, he hasn't been sitting there mulling over every single point and what he's going to say for days before he goes and does it,
Yeah.
Of course he's going to look like an idiot.
Yeah, I've thought about this before, and I never had the chance to bring it up, but you're right. It's like, this is what's Ben Shapiro, a 30-something-year-old man who graduated from Harvard or Yale, right? One of the Ivy Leagues. And he's going to colleges and debating with 18-year-old undergrads. It's like, now that I have my degree and I've studied this stuff for years, of course I could go make right-wing 18-year-olds look stupid and record it and make an owned compilation. That wouldn't make me smart. That would just mean I've looked at this stuff. I could probably own them in a debate arguing a position that I don't believe just because I have more knowledge. And to go back and own 18-year-olds and use that to make yourself big on YouTube is totally scummy, and it doesn't show how smart you are in any way. I was just gonna say, imagine Thomas Riggins, the guy we just interviewed, who's a 60 or 70-year-old retired philosophy professor who's been studying history and Marx for 60 years. If he went to a college right now, he could own any 18-year-old on that campus. It's not, it wouldn't necessarily mean what he's saying is right or wrong. It's just once you have all that knowledge, you can argue better. And it's so fucked up to be a 30-year-old person who graduated from an Ivy League and be like, I'm just going to go flex on 18-year-olds on the internet. The fact that people think he's all knowing. And then you grow. I thought Ben Shapiro was smart. And then I learn and grow and I go back and look at his arguments. I'm like, oh my, he's so stupid. 1 and 2, you could debunk this pretty easy if you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's why he picks those opponents. What I just realized is Ben Shapiro is the political discourse equivalent of the 20-year-old something dude who goes back to high school to pick up high school girls.
Yes, it is that.
Yeah, and the thing is, I didn't even study anything political. I didn't study economics or government or finance. I mean, I majored in film and television. With a minor in marketing, but I could go to a campus and debate 18-year-old political science or econ majors because I'm 27 now. I've had 6 years out of school and even more just to study this stuff. I mean, I've been paying attention to politics and economics since I was in high school. Just because I didn't major in it doesn't, so it's about,
Right.
with the time put in your age, you eventually get to a point. So yeah, there was a time when I was just I never liked Ben Shapiro, but I was libertarian in high school. I thought the idea of, individual rights, less government intervention, which I still believe to a point on the left, but it's about, instead of being, instead of promoting individualism and falling back on the idea of personal responsibility as for, why we have poverty and crime and all these what have yous, and there's no oppression. It's more along the lines of promoting the idea behind communal living and a society of safety nets and human support. And that all shifted when even though I didn't study politics, I spent a lot of time doing so in college, and that's sort of what I reached. And now I'm just holy shit, dude, I can't, libertarianism is so economically fucking what's the word? It's I guess inept.
Reality.
Yeah, it again, didn't study economics, know a lot about economics at this point, and it makes zero sense economically to promote some kind of open market idea, because boiling down to its simplest points or platforms, it's just believing in the the competitive ethicalness of corporations.
Yeah.
It's if we remove all restrictions and let them do whatever the fuck they want, it'll work out for us. I'm like, well, it's never done that ever in history. So
Nope.
why would you? I mean, if it wasn't for government intervention, we would still have child labor. I mean,
dude.
corporations were totally cool with that. And you believe that they're just going to do what's right for the consumer.
It was a normal thing.
No, they're always going to
like,
monopolize.
It was a normal thing to have like, you know, less than all of your digits by like 10 years old in the like early 1900s. You know?
Yeah.
Right. It's like that's little Tommy. He, you know, he's only got thumb pinky because he works in the factory.
I mean, I was reading a book recently. It's partially fictitious, but it's about a historical event, but it was about the building of the transnational railroad and how they basically brought over like Chinese like young boys as indentured servants, and they were the ones who were basically in the caves blowing them up, to get through mountains for this railroad. And they basically built the railroad from the west to the Midwest. And I mean, it talks about the documenting of like hundreds of children who would just get, have cave-ins and the conditions that they slept in. I mean, it wasn't even tents. It was basically like sticks with rags to hold up above them. And they had these like huge bunkers of them just going along made out of nothingness, or they slept in the caves. I mean, kids were getting like lung cancer at like the age of like 10 or 11. Because they were just using dynamite, or they were using raw gunpowder barrels to, because they didn't have the technology at that point.
Right.
So, that's a corporation right there, and they thought, oh yeah, this is ethical to get like what we need done, right? This is fine. Mm-hmm. We need to build this railroad, so fuck it. We may as well use minority children instead.
It's crazy that libertarians think corporations just won't do what'll maximize their profits if you take any regulations off them. And like you said, it's like the most utopian and dogmatic ideology. Like, let's just let them do what they want. And it'll work out, I promise. And you'll be like, I don't think that's true. Like, oh, everything bad, it's the government's fault. Trust us. Like, how? And you can't really explain it ever, but
listen, man, big old government, they're stepping on my snake. And I'd much rather a corporate boot I'd rather it be a Nike boot, on my snake.
Yeah, fascism brought to you by Pepsi. It's great. I mean, I'm not saying I trust the government. I trust them. I don't trust them at all either. I just trust corporations way less. And I think that there would be a certain amount of redeemable trust and ethicalness in the government if we could keep lobbying and special interest candidates and corporations out of it. Because a lot of the legislation and stuff, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but a lot of the legislation and policy making that's passed is for the benefit of corporations by corporations because they have all this power in politics. So
yeah, in a state, there's no state that arises in human society until you have class that arises. And then you need a state to mediate the irreconcilable contradiction between those classes. So that can mean, hey, class A, you're not allowed, if the proletarian class organizes and says, hey, we're going to go on strike if you don't pass a law saying no child labor, then the state has to listen because they rely on that labor. But that's pretty rare. For the majority of what the state is used for is just as a tool of suppression by the ruling class over the working class, which is what you see in most every liberal democracy around the world. But in the US, it's we are such a glaring example of we can't even get a stimulus check right now. Like, these motherfuckers will not cave an inch if it's something for workers. It is the state in the US is nothing but a tool of the ruling class to suppress us and call us idiots anytime we try and demand the slightest thing for workers. I agree. The government is bad. So I see why people in the US get drawn to libertarian ideas, but it's not because all government is just bad. It's because government is used by a tool of the ruling class. And if you get rid of the government, they're just going to make private police and private armies to do whatever the hell they want.
Right.
Yeah. Which kind of already exists.
Right.
I mean, they're already doing it, but it's going to be even worse. And I think that it's very, I find libertarians interesting because they have this strong contradictory view on human nature. because they're like, oh, communism can't fucking work because people are too goddamn greedy and lazy and they won't work hard. But at the same time, corporations are these, benevolent things that are going to, out of the goodness of their heart, pay for our roads and all sorts of shit and not charge us out the ass just to, fucking step on their sidewalk, like I'm pretty sure that if, roads were private, we would have coin operated cars that only go about 5 miles a quarter.
Yeah. I mean, you saw basically what, what's a good example of capitalist venture is, remember bird scooters?
Bird scooters.
Yeah. So I believe that they started in LA and they made their way to a lot of major cities. They actually were in Philly for a little while. But the idea was there were these scooters, right? That they were anywhere, right? It's not like the bikes where you have to get them from like an actual rack. They were anywhere. And what you would do is you would walk up, you would have the app, you would scan the one that you have, right? So then it now tracks that one is, you have that one, and it would track the distance you ride. And they were electric scooters. Yeah, see? Yeah. They were electric. They were electrically charged.
It's electric.
And you could take them, and the idea was to basically cut down on bikes and all that stuff in cities and make a profit, because corporations aren't making a profit on bikes, but people don't really drive around cities either. So they had these bird scooters, and two things happened. There were the people that loved them, and then they would make a job out of it, because they needed people to charge them. So they'd pay people to charge them. So what people would do is they would grab one, and they would grab a bunch of others, stack them on that one, and ride them to their home, and then plug in like 10 of them and charge them. And they monopolized, the bird scooter market in their area, and they were the ones charging them. And then there were the people that hated bird scooters. So every time they saw one, they would pick it up and smash it against the wall, or just like yeet the thing into non-existence. And I feel like that's sort of a microcosm of, capitalism itself, is the people like us who are anti-capitalist and hate capitalism and want to tear it down because of what it creates. And then there's the people who take advantage of the system in capitalism, which is your corporations and your 1%. And they also have to take janky methods. And this is what happens. Monopolization happens immediately when there's no competition. Also, when there's no regulation. Also, when there's no competition, but they eat up the competition.
We see that with Airbnb as well. Like there are people who they're like Airbnb slumlords, right? They've got like a bunch of properties that were cheap as shit, and they no one lives in them, but there's somebody in them all the time. Yeah,
and they they bypass a lot of the laws with that, requiring them to have their place fit for for a resident, for a tenant. They can bypass a lot of permits and stuff, because if you are building or acquiring property with the intention of renting it out to somebody, there's actually like hoops you have to jump through. You have to acquire permits and things like that. It's not the same thing as just like an extra room in your house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if your property is intended for that, it has to meet certain codes, because obviously tenants have to be protected, and you can't just have like exposed wire or like lead piping or so on and so forth, right? But making an Airbnb totally bypasses all of that. So all the regulation that we have that protects tenants gets thrown out of the window. And this is the stuff that happens. It's like Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that reminds me of the Uber and Lyft situation, where they won't classify the workers as actual workers; they're private contractors, which just means they can get fucked over. Uber and Lyft have to pay them less.
Yeah, and they give them less protection. They don't provide.
That's
they don't provide any kind of insurance. They don't provide any kind of reimbursement situation. I mean, you have scenarios where like female Lyft and Uber drivers get assaulted by men that they're that they're driving, and Uber and Lyft just sort of wash their hands of the whole situation and say, well, that's not our responsibility. You're an independent contractor. You understand the risks. But if they were working for a company, like as an employee, that would be an on-the-job incident. So again, I had a conversation with someone with a libertarian recently on TikTok, and he said, oh, well, monopolization and all these things that happen are because of regulation. I'm like, how? If the regulation itself is what's the best word? Is created, and the sole intent of that regulation is to prevent monopolization, it cannot create monopolization.
Right.
I mean, business. If the intent of business is to maximize profits, then of course monopolization and stamping out any amount of competition is always going to be the first move. If business is non-profit oriented, then it's not business. So can't have both.
The libertarians for me always fail to say how. They'll be like, when the economy crashes, the government bails out these corporations, and that's why the government creates monopolies. It's like, well, what would happen if the government didn't do that? I mean, before we had government regulation and subsidies, capitalism was crashing every 2 years instead of every 7 to 12. And then the reason they bail out those corporations, and the reason we've seen $6 trillion or $4 to $6 trillion dumped into huge corporations during the pandemic, is so those corporations don't go under and thousands of Americans don't lose their jobs and become unemployed and go riot. I mean, that's essentially what the Great Depression was. There weren't that many things in place to protect workers. Capitalism crashed really bad, and people were just screwed. So then you had FDR, who was like, we need to do the New Deal. We need to do all these government programs to fix this, which have mostly been undone. And now we're in the policy of every time capitalism breaks, we just, open the treasury and just start handing out money, which money basically doesn't even exist anymore, to giant corporations. And libertarians are like, if you take out that one piece, all of a sudden capitalism will work. If you have the government stop helping corporations, it's like, no, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And what that does also is it combats monopoly. Because let's look at the the big auto industry bailout that happened during the Great Recession, right? I mean, you have a scenario where we had to bail out American manufacturers. I mean, everything's manufactured in Mexico now anyway. But you look at we have GM, Ford, and Ram. Dodge is not American anymore. That's owned by an Indian company. But those two major ones, GM and Ford, they were bailed out to keep them alive as competition in the auto marketplace, because otherwise, and it's already happening because of just the level of of quality of product. But Asian manufacturers would have entirely taken over the market, and I mean they already have. But you look at what cars are bought the most in the U.S. Fucking Dodge, GM, and Ford are no longer making cars, sedans in general. It's SUVs, trucks, and muscle cars. That's it. I mean, because when you're trying to combat in the economy car market, I mean, Honda and Toyota are going to win all day, every day, and that's based on quality of product. It just as it is. But that was a move right there to salvage that part of the American market, which ultimately failed because they couldn't keep up. But that's it required to maintain that competition that libertarians so tout is going to happen. It needed the government to step in, because otherwise they would have failed, and the monopoly in the U.S. would have been between 3 manufacturers. If you're not buying a truck or an SUV, which, I mean, we're talking about the middle class and lower here, the working class, it's cars. I mean, it would have been between, again, 3 manufacturers: Honda, Toyota, and Hyundai. I mean, I'm trying to think of what other manufacturers out there, but Volkswagens are on their way out. They're not heavily bought in the U.S. anymore. They're mostly bought in Europe. And luckily, they're very popular in Europe, so they don't really have an issue. I mean, Saab is no longer in the U.S. Let's see.
All you're
Chevy
getting from this is that cars are dumb, and we need to like really, really work on excellent public transportation. You know,
I agree.
I agree. That's
high-speed rail.
High-speed rail, some really nice buses, maybe with chargers all in them and cushion seats, heated. You know what I'm saying? Very, very complex routes. I want fucking SEPTA to look like my fucking nervous system. You know, like
might as well make it dope as possible. And what I didn't even know that about the cars, but it's just another example. What that always makes me think of is like economic power is shifting to the east and out of the west, and it's going to happen eventually. And that's just another example. And now
real quick. Actually, finish your thought.
Because China has such a large private sector and they have 1.4 million people who could buy the products of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Now, when the U.S. tries to put sanctions on China, Pepsi and some other big companies in the U.S. are lobbying against it because they're like, oh wait, we're making money in China. So that's just always interesting to follow. But
no, China will be the economic super don't quote me on this, but I'm just saying it because I thoroughly believe it. But within 20 years, China will be the economic superpower, and the U.S. will not be. And the U.S. dollar will also have dropped an insane amount of international value because there's nothing behind it. I mean, we don't export anything of value besides war.
China's already.
So good.
So China's already buying crude oil in their own currency, which is challenging the petrodollar as well. But keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, because of the fact that we don't really export anything of value, we've given so much of the US dollar also to China. I mean, that's why it's been dropping in value internationally consistently for the past 10 years or more, actually, is because we have this issue of owing all these countries money. We give them the US dollar, which has no value. They then use the US dollar to buy things in the US. So that's why a lot of corporations are foreign owned now. And then slowly, that's going to be a cycle that happens until the dollar has no longer has any value. It's a dead currency.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think 20 years is probably pretty accurate, at least by 2050.
Yeah. Anywhere in that range. I mean, I'm not smart enough to know when it'll happen,
It'd be impossible to predict, but everyone should read. Everyone who's interested in politics, give this a read if you really want to know what China's trying to do. You can agree with it or not, but Xi Jinping has basically laid out what they're going to try and do over the next 30 years, and it is fascinating.
Actually, I'm very on the fence about China because nationally I am Chinese. I have sort of patriotic support for China and Hong Kong. But I also don't support China for the obvious reasons, also because it's a state capitalist society. So it's very.
My thing with China at this point, because the reason why I want to ask a question, is because I know enough about it, or I know enough about the United States that a lot of the at least very bare minimum arguments against China, they've got no freedom, type stuff, where I can ask about just simple things happening in the United States, like one of the most recent things where they signed that bill into law where workers can't sue their bosses or the places in which they work if they get COVID. There's a big old corporate protection for that. And I'm just like, do we have any? Does that sound like freedom to you? But I'd like to know your more educated stance on China, on Xi Jinping's goals, and what your sort of takeaways are there.
Me?
Yes, you.
Okay.
I've heard Jed's opinion. I don't care about his.
Yeah. He's heard me talk for hours So
I have an article. I think it's called No War with China on my
Okay.
website. So I mean, the main position I take with China, being someone who lives in the U.S., is anti-imperialist, right? And also, if there's propaganda being spread about China that you can poke holes in, I think that's important too, because they're one of the main targets of U.S. imperialism right now. The U.S. would love to overthrow China, but China's just too strong. It's not going to work, at least not through economic warfare, which is basically what the trade war was. It's the same thing we're trying to do with Venezuela, but we just can't do it to China because they're too strong or too powerful. Their economy is diversified. And then, so you had the split between Mao and Deng in China. So Deng took power and he said, we're going to open up our borders to foreign capital. And a lot of communists and socialists said, this is horrible. This is China going towards capitalism. And then China also split with the Soviets and Khrushchev at that time, which kind of turned the Cold War into more of a tripolar thing. But now China has grown so large, and they're starting they're continuing with the Belt Road Initiative, and all these countries who were previously taking out loans with the IMF and the World Bank, which we know are going to enforce austerity, comes with strings attached. These countries are now looking to China, the same way that a lot of countries were looking to the Soviet Union during the Cold War, but not the same. Like it's very different because China's got this enormous private sector, and it's not like you said, it's like state capitalist. It's not socialist. They claim they're going towards socialism, but like, at what point is China going to abolish wage slavery? They're not even close. But the argument is the Soviet Union tried to do everything perfect and everything right. Mao tried to do everything perfect, everything right. Not let any private capital in the country, and it eventually didn't work. Eventually the U.S. crushed them, and the Western powers crushed them. So the argument for China is they still have communism. The Communist Party in China is 100,000 people. They're still following a path to socialism. 1, 2, they've increased the material conditions of workers undoubtedly. They've raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and built amazing cities. And then, the argument is that private sector China does have a hold on it, and that's going to help them to combat the U.S. empire on a global stage. But then the critique of China is that their government's too authoritarian, the private market is too big, and the CCP is not going to be able to control it, and China's just going to become capitalist. And then the other argument is that they're doing imperialism. So these countries they're having take out loans with them, they're saying China's going to use that to basically control whatever these countries do, which I would argue hasn't happened so far. And I would rather have those countries take out loans with China than the IMF. But for me, as someone who focuses on geopolitics mostly, it's hard for me to not have a soft spot for China because they're a communist country who's challenging the U.S. empire. And when I look at what's going on around the globe, it always seems like the U.S. is trying to do something horrible, and maybe China, what they're doing isn't good, but it's, combating what the U.S. is doing. But, I would never say like the U.S. needs to copy China's governmental structure. What they're doing works for Chinese, and I trust the 100,000 members of the CCP to be critical and to decide what to do with their own country. And with me as someone in the U.S., my whole thing with China is no trade war, no invading them, basically, or no bombing them. And I think that's what's most important for people in the U.S. because who are white people who's never been to China to tell China this is what you need to do with your government?
Right.
I'm not critical of them, and I'll bring up my specific critiques, but at the end of the day, it's up to the Chinese to decide what they want to do with China.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think my it's more of getting a more complete picture. Like the reason why I asked, and all that information was lovely and helped contextualize. But yeah, I guess my not necessarily being like, what should China do, but more so what is the fuller picture that we're not getting as a product of U.S. propaganda for the most part.
So I think China has done something very ingenious, and it may be purposeful or it may not be. But one thing about China that obviously we all know is they have shit tons of money. like an insane amount of money. But what they don't, where they aren't powerful in is development. So they put a lot of money into recreation, not like going out and tossing a fucking frisbee around, but you can. They actually have the world's largest professional frisbee league.
I found my calling. All right, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm done with politics. Moving to China.
He's trying out for the Beijing Red Pandas tomorrow, but no, into sort of what is it? Like copying product manufacturing. So and what it's done is it's really undermined U.S. companies, because anything that you want or need, you can buy from a Chinese manufacturer for pennies on the dollar. And it's taken a lot of the power, sort of the economic power away from U.S. corporations. I mean, break it down to something as simple as, I mean, I don't like Amazon, but I use Amazon all the time, because for someone who doesn't have a lot of money, it's where I'm going to find, cheap options for the things I need. But for example, something as simple as like a 4K HDMI cable, right? If I wanted to go to Walmart or Target or Best Buy or whatever, I'd have to buy from whatever limited options that they have there. Best Buy has its own brand, Insignia, whatever, right? But we're talking about $20 pieces of equipment. I can go on Amazon and I can order from a Chinese company, which is that has and there's all these fake shell companies they have too, where it's like one big manufacturer in China owns like 50 names that all this stuff falls under. So you're gonna see like 1,000 products look exactly the same, just with a different name on it. Like when I mean exactly the same, I mean exactly the same. Even the photos are the same, and a different brand has been photoshopped onto it, right? But I was able to buy a 3-pack of 4K HDMI cables on Amazon for $8.99 instead of paying $29.99 for one, right? And the thing is, the quality is identical or better. It's not like cheap. It's just that it's where all their money has gone into this sort of replacement factor of products. So they don't develop their own products. I mean, that's sort of more Japan and Korea's thing. There's also a reason why you don't get Chinese cars in the U.S. I'm sure there's trade things about that too, but they don't have a very substantial vehicle lineup to export. But they have all these cheap options, and that's one of the biggest reasons why there's so much fervor against China trade and economically in the U.S. because U.S. corporations have all this power in politics, and they need to find a way to combat that.
Yeah, one interesting example, and it's not totally to the point you were saying. That's really fascinating about where they put their money. But Apple is now being challenged by in China. Nobody's buying Apple phones because you have, I don't know how to pronounce it, Huawei.
Huawei.
I call it Huawei, but I think
Huawei.
it's probably wrong.
Yes, someone told me how to pronounce it and I forgot. It's Huawei. I think you guys have it. But yeah, I mean, think about it. In the U.S., Apple has been designing phones to break. So when you update it, it breaks, and then you got to go buy the new one because they have such a monopoly. And then they have the dongle. You can't even plug your freaking headphones in without having some connector that's just designed so you have to lose it and go buy another one. So then in China, you have this, a company that's not making phones that break, which I think is hilarious because the communism is when no iPhone joke. It's like, no, under communism, we'll have iPhones that are cool that don't break. But I just think that's
iPhones that last more than 5 years.
Right. I mean, it's just like even in the private sector, China is, in some ways doing better than the U.S. by some measurements.
Yeah. And those Huawei devices are, when I say identical, they are identical to Apple products, just with a different logo on it. And it's down to even the user interface looking the same, or mostly the same, whatever they can do without getting, without falling under, major, issues with Apple. Yeah. But like,
that's amazing.
They've even created a charging system that is identical to the Lightning charger, aside from 2 minor differences, which is like in the pins, to the point where Apple can't come after them for it. but it's identical, and they've made it so you can use lightning chargers on their products. You can
No
use
way.
Apple chargers for their products. Yes.
That's awesome.
So they're like,
I
hey,
really
you
hope
already
it's
own
called
a
the
bunch of
Thunder
chargers,
Charger.
but your iPhone kicked the bucket. Buy a Huawei Zen phone or whatever they call it. I think it's called a Z phone or whatever, right?
I'm not
you can
sure.
use your lightning chargers, right? I think it's called a Z phone, I think, and then they have the Zen Book, which is their MacBook. And it's really identical. It's crazy. The only reason why I haven't bought them is for me, I own Apple products. Yeah, well, like I own Apple products because in my line of work, in creative work, the synchronicity and streamlining of the workflow between Apple products is like unbeaten. I mean, Microsoft has tried and all, but it's never reached that level of just sort of congruence between devices. So that's the reason why. And the Huawei devices don't have that, and they don't run. The one thing is their operating system does not, is not the same. So I believe that they are Android. I believe that they are.
Okay.
But then their computers run some weird. I don't know whether it's Windows. I don't know enough about them, but I've thought about getting one, except for the fact that I wouldn't be able to have, OS X and iOS and all that stuff. I'm sure there's a way to program it, but I'm not that tech savvy.
You can definitely block one of these guys. They have. They've got the one that's fold in half.
Yeah, I mean they've touched on everything, and that's like that's the thing. Like they've got the tech to make your tech better and cheaper. They're just not in the business of making new tech.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta head out here soon, guys. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? Sorry, I got a meeting at.
No worries.
No, it's all good. I mean, we're at an hour 6, so I mean, I don't have any questions. I've seen your content on TikTok, so I didn't remember the name. I'm bad with usernames, so I recognized it by face, and I was like, "Oh, sick!" But I'm lurk only. I don't do any creating on TikTok. I just argue with fucking 17-year-old libertarians in the comments. But
and then he sends me the screenshots.
Yeah, I do. But anything you want to plug? I mean, we don't have a lot of viewers, but anything you want to plug?
The TikTok, EddieLigerSmith, and my YouTube, Midwestern Marks on YouTube is what we're trying to grow right now. But yeah, I'd love to come back on with you guys sometime. This was definitely fun.
Oh, absolutely.
I think we have a good, like you guys have some knowledge on things that are related to the stuff that I know about, but that are different. We can kind of expand on each other's knowledge. So I really enjoyed that the conversation there.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we love having guests on. It's just learning about all this stuff. Like, so the thing is, like, I mean, Jewel and I have been friends for a while, and we've talked a lot, so we're kind of on the same page with everything, and we already know what we know, And when it comes down to the podcast where it's just us, it's really us just rambling back and forth about shit that we already know about each other, and it becomes very repetitive. So having guests on is like super awesome.
For sure, cool. Yeah, hit me up anytime. And love to do it again.
Oh, we'd love to have you. Love to have you join me on the stream. I'll teach you how to play Among Us. It'll be grand.
Perfect. Yeah, we definitely do that.
Political TikTok commentator Among Us.
Yes. It's going to be great. We're going to figure out which one of us is actually going to like stab us in the back later on. It'll be great. It's probably going to
instead of finding the imposter, whatever, it's find the liberal among the communists.
Yes.
All right, patreon.com/Don't Panic Podcast. Thank you so much. We've had EddieLigerSmith on. It's been amazing. And we will catch you in a week.
Indeed. Thanks for hanging out with us, Eddie. And my lovely stream people, thanks for tuning in and joining the first flagship episode of the live version of the Don't Panic Podcast. I was really nervous in the beginning. That's why I rambled at first. I'm rambling now because I'm still nervous. Because
you ramble all the time.
That's fine. I ramble.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Thanks, folks.